So,
Okay, welcome to the session part of this morning's session, which is looking at assessing soil health across different scales in Europe. We'll just allow the last few people to come in and sit down. We'll start by introducing the two moderators of this session. So I'm Rachel Creamer, and I'm Professor of Soil Biology at Wageningen University. And I'd also like to introduce David Robinson. And David looks after soil monitoring at CEH, which is Centre for Ecology and Hydrology at Bangor in Wales. This morning, what we would like to do is have a panel discussion. That does not mean that we don't wish to hear from you. So we have some questions set to our panelists here that we'll introduce in a minute, but we also want to give you the opportunity to ask questions as part of this process. So as we go through the panel members, as you see the topics, feel free to raise your hands, and where we can, we will try and include you into that discussion. So let me start by introducing Anne-Catharina Dalk. Anne-Catharina is a young farmer, a representative of CEJA, which is the Association of Young Farmers in Europe, but she's also a farmer herself in Belgium. And so she's come today to talk to us about the local scale and dealing with soil management. I'll then move on to Erwin Slezak. Yeah. Erwin is a regional policymaker in Lower Austria, and really supports the farmers in his region. But he'll be talking to us about moving from farm scale to that local policy scale, or regional policy scale. We then move to Luis, which I think many of you know, but I will introduce you anyway. So Luis Sanchez Alvarez. Luis joins us from DG AGRI, and he will be looking at the European policy perspective. And then we move to Nina. And Nina Cole? Kula, thank you. Nina joins us actually from New Zealand. So we looked for the furthest away place as possible. We didn't pay for our flights, don't worry. In fact, she got the train here from Wageningen, which I think took 20 plus hours. So, but Nina will give us a little bit of a global perspective on what other policymakers also are dealing with respect to the question about soil health and how to deal with it. David, over to you.
Thanks very much. So next we have Arwin, and you've all seen Arwin this morning, who's at JRC, and he's going to be representing Lucas and his experience with monitoring and topsoil monitoring. Next we have Bridget Emmett, who's at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. Bridget was on the first mission board and has a lot of experience with national monitoring of soils and ecosystems. And next we have Teresa Pinto, who again spoke this morning and serves on the mission board. Next we have Maria Briones. Marvelous. So, and your interest is in soil biodiversity. Yeah, that's great. And lastly we have Diego Sota, and he's the coordinator of INBEST, and is very interested in the development of economic valuation and for healthy soil ecosystem services.
Many thanks, David. And apologies if our pronunciation of names is terrible. The British are particularly bad at pronouncing European names, but we will try our best. So what we wanted to do was follow on from the three talks that we had this morning, where we really highlighted how important it is to define the questions at the scale of assessment that you're working at. So what is it that we want to know about when we talk about soil health? So that's why we brought this wonderful panel together of 9 different members, and you can think, wow, do we need all these people? But yes, we do, because we really need to see it from the different perspectives. So we're going to start off with Anne-Catharina, because we know that the local level is so important in terms of really getting the buy-in and of farmers, but not just farmers, land owners in general, land managers, in terms of them understanding why soil health is so important in their systems, which I think many of them already do, and you can reflect on that. But also, what are the key questions that you think that farmers in particular have about how we can assess the soil health in their situation? Over to you, Anne-Catharina.
So you asked me what are the main challenges. I must say the first one is knowledge. I must say that regarding the health of the soil, at this moment I'm quite lost. When I see my soil analysis, all seems good, okay? Well, organic matter, when we have 1.1, it's okay. And yes, I saw the report of the Court of Auditors, 60–70% of soil destroyed. I was quite shocked. And yes, it's nitrogen, but we are working on nitrogen. We put cover crops, we put new technologies, soil analysis to see that. Organic matter in Belgium, in Wallonia, we have really punctual point of erosion. So, and we know that we can increase with organic matter. So, chemical and physical health we work on. So, biological health. What about how we can improve this? We need indicators. And really, we feel really attacked by all these new practices for soil health. You must know that tillage, doing the best seed bed, comes from our grandparents. So now it's like, you know, it's really bad and you are completely wrong. There are many scientists in the room, and it's like people say one time, oh, you know, you do the science bad for decades. Really, you destroy the science, and watch some videos, some practices from South America, and you will do the right. What would you say? It's quite shocking. And so, yes, we need respect, we need information, we need indicators to really implement practices for soil health. But at this moment, we are really lost. And so, other challenges to improve soil health, apart knowledge, respect, it's also availability of soil analysis. I must say that in Belgium, at this moment, when I need a soil analysis, I need 3 weeks to have the results. And the guy is always saying, oh, Anne-Catherine, sorry, I don't have the time. I will try to have 20 minutes this day, but oh, maybe it will be next week. Okay, so beautiful science, but how I can test on my soil. Also the legislation, it's a legislation of dates, of rules, sometimes binary rules, and sometimes not supporting really the soil health. I'm in a group of farmers testing new practices. Yep. For 1 year, this group was created, so we are really reflecting about that. And we were at a session about soil health and biology and cover crops and so on. And so at one moment say, okay, with my cover crops, so I must destroy it at this moment, and then the guy said, the advisor, no, if you do that, you will not be in the eco scheme, this eco scheme. And we say, because I am in the policy stuff, and really, we do rules to support soil health and not to be an obstacle. So really do rules adapted to farmers, and with the dates it's really difficult. Regarding the climate also, at this moment in Belgium we have heavy rainfalls, a lot. We cannot stop to see rains. And so it was not our project to do the tillage for the next crop, but it will be mandatory. It's the only way to put the crops next year. And because of that, we are not in the right dates of the laws. Okay, but sorry, if I want to have a crops next year, I will need tillage. And I asked to 2 friends in conservation agriculture for 30 years how they will do. And one say, okay, yes, but me, when I harvest, the day after, I put the other crops, but there are 2 brothers with a son. They have a lot of equipment. It's not the case of all farmers. And another one say, okay, I am going to wait January, I think, to sow. But he has structure of 30 years of conservation agriculture. It's not the case for all farmers. And finally, the last point to implement practices for soil health, if the equipment, the price of the equipment, you must know that the price of our production is quite stable. We had a high increase of the milk last year, but now we are a big decrease, so it's quite stable. But the price of the equipment is really high, increasing, following the inflation. So how I can pay that?
Yeah.
Yes, if we give price which follow inflation for my milk, my wheat, and so on, we must not be competitive with other part of the world. Okay, but now I'm quite in a difficult situation. We can create a group of farmers with equipment, but I must say there is big competition between farmers from the land, so angriness between people, and entrepreneurs are not always available, so yes, tricky situation.
Thank you very much, Anne-Catherine. And I think it's fair to say that you are quite a proactive young farmer. So you really engage in the discussions on sort of conservation of agricultural systems to sort of best practices. You really work to look at ecosystem functionality in your system. So the messages that you're giving here is one of frustration in many ways because you are so proactive, but there are limitations. And I really understand this comment that you feel that many farmers are really put down because of practices that their grandparents passed on to their children and your parents have passed on to you, which of course 30, 40 years ago you were given the advice to do. And now we're saying, oh, it's all wrong. Everything you've done is wrong, you know, and we need to change that completely. But there are lock-ins, and there are difficulties, and there are policy constraints, and we need to think about how we can support you in that transition, but also give you data on time that's useful to you in the practices that you do. So let's move on to Erwin. Erwin, you heard what Anne-Catharina says. You have these conversations with farmers in Lower Austria as well, commonly. Can you give us, from your perspective as a regional policy maker, what your role is in terms of supporting farmers from a soil health perspective and what you think the challenges are?
Yes, thank you very much. I think the farmers are essential. And as I was responsible for compost in my country, I always bring these examples. If you want to make good compost, you cannot only work with fungi and with worms, you need the bacteria. And the bacteria are the farmers. No? And if we want to have good soil, we need farmers, even in our meetings. No? And when I make a conference with the Eastern country, I always have active farmers with us because they are living from the soil and they bring another input. So I'm very happy that you're here. And I'm in the regional government. And if we make a meeting from the government, the fungi are meeting and fungi produce fungi, mycels. And so we need this input from one side, from the science, but also from the farmer side. And so the farmer are essential in our country. But dealing with the scale, the scale of an assessment depends from the purpose. Yeah. And in our country, in Austria, we have 8 agro-environmental units and 87 sub-agro-environmental units. And this could be the scale of soil districts in our country. And also the borders could be a scale for but if you really want to make the work on a deeper way, you need a local scale, but also even the parcel scale, and to produce best management practices and toolboxes that can be used by the farmers.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mate, you can pass on the microphone. If you have questions, by the way, please raise your hands and I'll try and spot you in the audience, and I will come back to the questions in a few minutes. But we're going to move now on to Louis, who is a policymaker, of course, at European scale, and therefore have a very different perspective. I mean, I think it's fair to say that it's an impossible task to measure, monitor, and advise every land parcel or landowner in the country, in Europe. it's an unachievable task. So, of course, your perspective in terms of monitoring is looking at the trends and sort of the distributions across Europe and where needs are. Can you give us a reflection on for DG Agriculture then, what are the sort of key issues that you face in terms of this question of soil health assessment and monitoring?
Well, okay, I think you already gave a little bit the answer.
Sorry.
Because indeed, of course, it would be great if we have information at parcel level. Because if you have exhaustive information at that level, of course, you can very quickly and easily move on to the continental level, or you can do whatever you want. But yes, it's difficult to achieve. It can be a long-term objective, I think. But to really make policies, we really need to measure those mega trends. So we really need to identify where the issues are, where degradation of soil is being aggravated, what are the drivers, and also what could be the management practices that can make soil management more sustainable. Of course, it will be for you, for the scientists, to help us to define what is the right size of the sample, for example. And if we can combine this with methodologies that very nicely were explained before, on remote sensing or proxies or other technologies, so that's your role. So in principle, what we need is really to set a well-founded baseline, clear indicators, and then be able to monitor those indicators at EU level, regional, sub-regional, and be able to define then at local level what are the best management practices. On this is where the living labs come in. And I also agree with what was said before. There is where the scale is completely different, where we have to test solutions, and we can even take more indicators, more precise, to see if one technique or one management practice works or doesn't work for a particular context. So for the future, of course, we would like to have many more reliable data to be much more accurate. This is, of course, this has limitations and uncertainty, and these methodologies should help us to limit a little bit the uncertainty and to try to follow those mega trends and the impact of the policies.
Thank you very much, Louis. And I mean, I think it's, well, from my experience, and over the years I've worked with quite a number of farmers, I see that the interest there really lies in understanding the soil functions or the ecosystem services that you're working with in your local environment and how you can promote those, whether it's water regulation in terms of dealing with the huge amounts of rain that we're currently dealing with in the Netherlands and Belgium. I know in other parts of Europe, of course, it's too much sunshine and no rain. We heard from Yannick that actually, I happen to know that Yannick's farm hasn't had rain this year. So that's, you know, shocking the other side of the spectrum. But there's multiple ecosystem services. When we move to the European scale, of course, we think about the trends in terms of degradation and wanting to ensure that we reduce that degradation taking place. So we also need to find a way that we move from the positive messages at the local level, but also capture some of the drivers affecting the threats or the vulnerabilities, shall we call them, at the larger scales. So we need to find a way of matching those together, and I think that's very important. Nina, we come to you. You're a national policymaker from New Zealand, and of course, in New Zealand, this is a hot topic too. Hearing over the last few days all the discussions that have been going on about soil health, how does this relate to what's happening in New Zealand? And from your perspective, are we going in a similar direction? Do we have the similar discussions, or do you have a very different perspective on it?
Yeah, thank you. I should probably clarify, I've been here for 3 months working with Wageningen Research, specifically to study the EU soil monitoring law, to see what I can learn from that for the New Zealand context. So apart from the last 2.5 days, I've also learned a lot from the last 3 months talking to a lot of stakeholders. So interestingly, yeah, a lot of the soil threats and problems in New Zealand are the same as I would say globally, so also in the EU. Also the way those threats are approached, the monitoring is approached or isn't done. The way policy works or doesn't work is very similar, so that's, you can see that positively and negatively, I suppose. So what I've learned is actually a bit surprising to myself. So I work as a soil scientist for the Ministry for the Environment, so I'm trying to work on policy that promotes a good environment. And talking and hearing all the talks here, it's obviously very important that we monitor, that we have some sort of policy or legislation in place, and that we look across those different skills. What I think, and from what's just been said, my experience, which is limited with farmers, I should also say, but what I understood is that a lot of farmers actually have farm advisors and take samples regularly, even if it's just for soil fertility analyses. So I think a lot of that data is actually there. The problem with upscaling is that it's private data, so that's a problem that we in New Zealand face with setting up a monitoring system, and specifically also with regulations or policy, is access to privately owned land. As soon as you say, you know, I'm here from the Ministry for the Environment, I want to take a sample, which wouldn't happen, I would be the person, unfortunately, taking the sample. But yeah, as you probably can imagine, people wouldn't really participate in that if there is going to be any type of burden or regulations that they would then have to follow, or any punishment even. So I think there actually should be a disconnect between the local skill, the farmer level or landowner level of sampling and knowledge transfer and advice to farmers that is actually, I think, completely disconnected from national or continental monitoring, where you just look at the big trends. And I'm going to be a bit provocative maybe, but I think what I've learned is that soil legislation is not the answer. So I was very much in favor of the monitoring directive or the soil health law. And yeah, I'm not going to, this is not an advice or anything. It's also, I should say, personal opinion. I'm not speaking on behalf of the ministry at this point. But I think bottom-up works much better. So funding or incentivizing landowners to have the knowledge and the knowledge, the know-how of what to do, how to manage their land in such a way that it benefits all of us. How that works in practice is something that I've tried to ask many people, both in terms of policy or monitoring or sampling, and there is never actually a clear answer, which is really unfortunate. And I think also from the last few days, you know, this has all been really great discussions, but practically, how is this all going to work, or how is anything going to work? That's always, that for me, keeps being the question that we don't actually address. So if all these living labs, I feel that's the answer, or the lighthouses. Yeah. If that's just, you know, if, to me, I would say in 2050, every landowner in the world is a lighthouse farm or landowner, whatever you want to call that. Something else that I also wanted to touch on is New Zealand is a bicultural society. It's not perfect, obviously. So it was colonized by the Europeans or the British. But there is a treaty with the indigenous Maori, and that is the only legal sort of document of the country. So indigenous tribes, or iwi as they're called, have to be involved in any sort of policy making.
Very nice. And
for them, land is
precious.
You know, it's not you don't own the land, and they have a very different approach and views of how to manage and care for the land and have this reciprocal relationship with it. So place-based knowledge in New Zealand is extremely important, because those local tribes, they hold the knowledge and the customs associated with managing their resources. So it's not just the land, it's all the natural resources, and they see themselves, the people, as part of that. So it's an ecocentric viewpoint that is very different from how, let's say, European way of looking at land.
I have to stop you there, I'm afraid, Nina. I'm
Can
afraid.
I say one more sentence? I think in Europe you have so many different cultures, and with this monitoring law, you know, people are like, oh, but my country is different. But actually, I think culturally you can learn a lot from each other as well.
Yeah.
And I would want to stress that.
Okay, thank you very much. Yep. Thank you, and I think you nicely introduced also the living lab concept there, which is of course something that is being rolled out through the Mission Soil programme. And I think this is a real opportunity to see how we can co-create this new way of connecting, communicating, networking, learning from each other, what the practicalities are, what the constraints and the barriers that farmers like Anne-Catharina are facing, and how we can find better solutions at that local level, but also how we can bring that together. We're going to move now more to the science and the research side. So I'm going to pass to David, who will start with you, Arwin.
Thanks very much. So this segment's going to be about monitoring, and we're going to keep that theme of scale and looking across scales. And I think this is where we go slightly off-piste. So I'm going to ask all of you to stand up. So if you're sitting there with your laptop, I'm sorry, can you just put it on one side? And if everybody can stand up, I'm going to ask my panel to stand up. Oh, that's fantastic. Right, that's good. So this game is old school Slido. Okay? Old school Slido.
Great.
So look around, see your colleagues, see your friends. And I wanted to think about soil monitoring. So if you have measured soil in the field, you've been out, you've measured soil, you've taken a soil core, can you remain standing? But if you've not done that, so if you've had no interaction with soil, can you sit down, please? Oh, yeah. Well, we got rid of a few there. That's good, isn't it? Excellent. Good stuff. Right, so now we're going to think about scales, okay? We're going to think about scales. So if you've been out and you've been monitoring and you've monitored, what should we say, at the farm scale. So you've done your soil sample, and we're going to do farm scale. So if you've not done something at the farm scale, so that's more than one sample, can you also sit down? Oh, I'm surprised. I'm surprised. I thought, okay. Yeah. Okay, that's good. Still got a good number of people standing. So let's go to, what should we go to? Sort of a landscape scale, a bunch of farms. So if you've not done a bunch of farms, yeah, start sitting down. Panel's going good here. Yeah. Panel's going good. So
we'll be the only one standing.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I'm impressed. That's good. Right, let's leap up. So national scale. Who has been responsible for monitoring soils at a national scale? Oh, hey! Oh, that's not bad, is it? We've still got a few of you standing. Okay, I'm going to kill you off. Who has been responsible for sampling at pan-European scale?
Uh-oh. Then we all sit down. It's only Arwin.
So, hey, brilliant. So if you've run a program at pan-European scale, thank you very much. If you'd like to sit down. So Arwin, you are our man, I think. It's good that you're on the panel there. So managed to knock the rest of them out. So I guess the first question is really, I mean, running something at pan-European scale, that's got to have a few challenges. That's got to have a few, I mean, we've seen panels this morning presenting and talking about some of the successes and some of the, but perhaps you can talk us through a little bit of what it takes to put out that sort of monitoring program.
I think it's important also to reflect that, for a lot of the issues we've been talking about over the past 2 days, the only way to collect data on that topic is to actually go out and take a sample in the field. Yeah. There's a lot of emphasis on use of other technologies, remote sensing. I come from a remote sensing background as well. But if you want to develop machine learning approaches, if you want to validate new technology, new sensors, you have to go out and collect the samples. So I think that's the key, one of the key messages that I want to say. And the reason behind the LUCAS approach was, well, we tried in the early 2000s to develop a system to monitor forest soils where each country was responsible for the data collection and the analysis of the samples. When we brought the data together, it was basically unusable because they'd use different approaches to sampling, they'd use different laboratory approaches. And so the driver for us was to have a harmonized standard data set that would give us indeed an overview of the key trends in soils. And indeed, we're not necessarily interested in what an individual farm is doing. We're more interested in to see what's happening in the farming system at a particular bioclimatic region. And there are some challenges in there. First of all, in terms of the scale, we have about 500 surveyors going out and collecting more than 20,000 samples, 40,000 last year. And there are issues of access to private land, confidentiality. But then there are some aspects that, let's say that where there's intrinsic information, the intrinsic characteristics of soils are there. They're not the result of management per se. So I think we can make those available. But when it comes to issues of maybe of pollutants, therefore there's some sensitivity in there, and there we don't necessarily give that information out to the public, but we look at aggregating it, and again, at looking at regional trends. Yeah. And then maybe the final consideration is, there was a comment made about measuring all the fields in Europe. Well, under the CAP, there is a system whereby each field is identified, actually, and in the soil strategy, there is a proposal to landowners to test their soils for free. And so the mechanism isn't far away, actually, where all landowners could test their soils and then hang it onto this system that identifies individual parcels. Yep. And we can be, moving in a positive way to having real-time information at parcel level that reflects how those soils are being used.
Thanks, Arwin. There's been quite a bit of discussion about soil districts, and this concept of soil districts has come up in some of the talks. Whose responsibility is that going to be? How's that going to be, how's that going to sort of pan out, do you think?
So the soil law is quite clear that the definition of soil districts is the responsibility of member states. Right. So now we're entering a phase of discussion between, obviously, the three EU institutions that are responsible for law, but eventually the law should be implemented at national level, and so the position for us is that the Commission will support member states in how to define representative soil districts. But you would hope that discussions we've seen previously in terms of the relationships between soil characteristics, climate, land use should be reflected somehow in these soil districts, because at the end of the day, maybe the monitoring and how you deal with, say, the pressures that are acting on those soils in those districts have to be done at a local level. So,
super. Thanks, Arwin. So, Bridget, you said something which was quite interesting, that you've been monitoring, not you personally, but your organisation, you've been monitoring for 40, 45 years. Who is it that is interested in that monitoring? And, what are some of the challenges and opportunities you've seen through your time in running monitoring programs?
Yeah, so 45 years since 1978. It's called Countryside Survey. And I wish myself and David, who now is responsible, could take credit, because the first challenge is to get a nationally representative sample. Citizen science is absolutely fantastic, but citizens love going to the pretty places or the farms do that. And as the mission says, this isn't just about farmland. We must have data from all our different land use types. So who's interested in the data? National governments. They want to know whether their policies work or not. And we have been extremely fortunate in the UK that they have wanted to know that off and on. And one of the big challenges is not following fashion, but keeping with it. And we are very lucky that we had a design developed in 1978 by someone called Bob Bunce. And we have had independent statisticians from different countries come in and say, we still can't better it. It's a structured, stratified, nested design based on elements in the landscape that don't change. Because we do want to be able to report on all the grasslands that are going to be converted to forest now for the carbon credits. So if you structure according to your land cover, your design is kind of going to then go wobbly a bit. So that's one of the things. So it's national governments. And how we sell it is, these days, we don't just sell it on soil, we stack it. So we go and say to the biodiversity people, so you want plant biodiversity, you want pollinators, you want to know about waters, and we have a soil monitoring program, but it's not. It's an integrated monitoring program where we sample in the same place in 1 kilometre squares, soil, vegetation, birds, pollinators, headwaters, ponds, landscape quality, cultural features. I could go on and on. Wales, which Arwen and I both come from, is a particularly fantastic country who basically have got this. And that same integrated monitoring program reports national trends. How do all the policies stack up at a national scale? Are we just creating oases and deserts as we do our CAP? Or actually is it all adding up? And what is the impact of the CAP payments? Not for us anymore, but what have you. It's the same monitoring program, the same surveyors, the same methodologies, the same indicators. Instead of having these multiple programs all not connected, because we know ecosystems work together. How we manage the land affects the plants, affects the soil, affects the water, affects the birds, affects the pollinators. So there's an efficiency of going and talking to your colleagues at a national level or a soil district level and saying, can we stack this up, create a national representative sample, and report in a consistent way that in 45 years' time, your name is going to be called out like I just have done for Bob Bunce, who developed it 45 years ago. And the final thing is the technologies. You cannot imagine how important it is to us that Panos and Arwen keep saying field, field, field. The pressure to follow the latest technology. We are put in a bag if we're monitor people of being old-fashioned, or you still go out and take a soil sample. The fact that we can point to EU and Lucas and say, they agree with us. EO is fantastic for soil sealing and erosion and for land cover. But there's nothing, they cannot tell us how much cadmium is in our soil. They cannot tell us how many eDNA fungi there is. They just cannot do it still. And even for soil carbon, so far you need bare soil to do it. So we all have to stand together and just sort of say, these field people, they are amazing. They can do all this stuff to go out in all weathers and do it. We just need to support each other. And that's one of the biggest challenges, is holding the line and telling both our scientific colleagues, we know you have a fantastic new method. Have you tested it in all soil types for all the land use types? Have you done this? Usually the answer is no. It's tested in a tilled arable soil. Well, come back and talk to me when you've tested it for forest systems and urban systems and what have you. So that's my challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bridget. So we've seen that we've got quite a lot of soils people in the room, and soils people love to talk indicators. So indicators keeps us occupied forever. So, Bridget, pay attention.
I'm talking to the big boss.
Pay attention. Now, indicators.
Sorry.
Okay, you've been doing this a long time. What's your experience with indicators? I mean, do you have a whole massive array of indicators, or you have some that you really, that you're favorites, or how does it work with indicators? What's your experience?
Yes, so you need a simple set of core things that people get. And then as money goes up and down and new technology, you can expand it or contract it. So we have kept to a simple set of core indicators that we absolutely know are fundamental to soil health. you can guess what they are. And then over time, like in 2007, we got money for doing basal respiration and potential nitrogen mineralization and every contaminant. It was just fabulous. And then our budget was massively cut, and we've gone back to our core set of 5 measurements. It breaks your heart, but you keep those 5 set of simple field things for that, and that means we can do data. The benchmark that we heard in the AI for Soil Health, we've created benchmarks for over 129 different soil, land use, climate combinations by maintaining that consistent set of simple field measurements. And you just blow it up or down depending how nice the government is at the time.
Great, thank you very much. So we'll move on to Teresa, and you said something that really resonated with me. So my wife is Spanish, and she comes from farming background, and my sister-in-law has a farm about an hour and a half north of here. And one of the things that you said was family, because I know what that is. And so there's a question of how we reach people's needs, families. Because often on the farm scale, that's what it comes down to. Do you have some thoughts about how we can do that and how we can reach families and make change?
Thank you, David. This is also something I would like to talk for a long time on. But I would like to tell you a very small story, which is a bit about this. But it's a month ago we were in southern Portugal, southeast Portugal, so it's similar to what Yannick just mentioned in terms of context, getting drier and drier with extensive silvopastoral systems, grazing for lots of livestock production, but very big farms and family farms. They have like 1,000 hectares. And there is one of the farmers we work a lot with from the university. He's high educated, very entrepreneur, president of the local cooperative. He organized one day a conference on water. What do we need water for? If we can have more water, so a water dam, what we will use the water for? And he's defending that they need water for, make it complementary to the extensive system. And there are some other forces who want to have water to do intensive irrigated systems. So there's a debate. And he made a wonderful presentation about how his farm is and what he could get if he could get more irrigated areas and what he was losing with climate change, a lot of graphs. There was a lot of discussion, and there were other interventions. But at the end of the day, I was discussing with him, and he told me, you know, I'm a bit frustrated because my colleague, farmers, they didn't understand my lecture. They were looking at these graphs, and then they told me, it's very good with your graphs, but we cannot understand them. We need something else. And he is a farmer, and he knows these people. So what I'm here telling this story for is that we need to make it much more understandable and interesting for these families, for the farmers and for others. I mean, we work a lot, that's a bit what I said also in my lecture, but I want to stress this. We work in these living labs and in all the activities in the projects with the usual suspects. The educated farmers, the engaged ones, the ones which, Bridget, she told me in the UK is 30%. In Portugal, I don't know the numbers, but I think it's 10%. And then there's all the others which don't know anything about soils and don't understand our language, so they don't understand when we talk about indicators. What they want to know is what will it change in my farm and my income? If I do this investment, will I have more production in my pasture? Would I be able to feed my animals for a longer time without having to buy further outside? And this is what he has to discuss with his family. I mean, he is not discussing this with an advisor because the advisors are not there. We have a very fragmented advisory system, which a lot of countries still have. So they are alone and they're discussing the family. In the family, they are not discussing indicators or the different dimensions of the soil. They are discussing what should I invest in order to have a more safe income. And I think this knowledge gap is extremely important to tackle. And I don't have really the solution, but I think we need to think about it, that we need to have a language which is really motivating for these family farms, or for even if they are big and educated. And we have also to focus on the advisory system, which is missing and which requires much more hands-on advisors which know about the reality. So it's looking at farmers, looking at what the advisors, with much more attention for those who are not in rooms like this and we are not participating in meetings.
Super.
David, if I can just come in there, actually Alfred Grand once said something to me that really resonated, which was that for farmers, long-term resilience is about legacy. It's about passing on the land to the next generation. And we come back to legacy and the meaning of land. In New Zealand, you have that culturally, but actually for families, this becomes very, very important. So yes, they have those long-term visions, but of course, often they're struggling with the short-term demands in that system and constraints that they face. So I think it is so important, and maybe Anne-Catherine, you recognise this, that the desire is there for the long-term resilience and to make sure that they can pass something on to the next generation. But how do I do that compared to what I have to deliver this year?
So Maria, we often hear it said about, there's I don't know, millions and millions of organisms that are in a teaspoon of soil. And we go from that scale, we go to the size of nations and Europe. How are you dealing with that within your project and within your science on soil biodiversity?
Well, we're not going to sample the whole Europe, of course, because that's what Lucas is doing very well. Now we are trying to select the most representative ecosystem land uses and managements across climatic gradient, so we also include the climatic variation. Soil types and everything have a good representation, like Britta was saying, a representative sample, and then we sample everything there. And we sample at the same time to get the spatial scale. And another thing I would like to include here that is not being mentioned is the temporal scale.
Yeah.
We talk about spatial scales, but for me it's just a picture of the moment. But in my case, because I work with soil organisms, they could be sleeping today, they could be active, they could be on the surface, they could be at the bottom, they could be eating someone, being eaten. So I need to know also how they change, because what I see today, it might be different in a month's time.
Yeah, super, thank you. And Diego, you're more on the sort of economic side of things. You're thinking about different stakeholders. And how are you dealing with that across different sizes of organizations, stakeholders, the economic aspects?
Yeah, thanks. I think Rachel in the previous presentation showed very well this approach that we are following some projects that starting at a local scale and continuing going up, increasing the scale to deal with these different scales. In the INVASOIL, for example, we planned the project to start at a lighthouse, living lab level, and then try to connect these living labs among them or with other initiatives that are in the area or are facing similar problems. Yeah. For example, we have living labs focused on agriculture in the Mediterranean region. I think the next step, we will start with a local stakeholder network, farmers, policymakers, like NGOs. We will try to establish this following the quadruple helix approach. But also in the next steps, we will try to connect these initiatives with other local initiatives and try to establish like a dialogue to see if they're having the same problems, if they're using the same indicators, if the techniques they're using to improve the soil health are working better, how they get their money, their funds. We are interviewing a lot of people to see if they are happy with the incentives. And during this first year of the project, we are doing it at a living lab lighthouse level. But in the next steps, we will try to make this big connected network. And also I can say that at international level, we are trying also to involve some big organizations or associations to give like the big picture of the problem. So we are contacting with associations from forestry land use, from agricultural land use, investors associations. But the problem that I face in here is that most of these organizations are also working in other problems, and even they have the name of European Association, there is a few people working on this. So they have an overload of work and they cannot participate in as much as projects as they want.
Yeah, super, thank you. So that's given us some different perspectives. And I think I'm going to be handing back to Rachel, where we're probably going to do some modern day Slido.
Yeah, so we have some questions from the audience coming in. Well, we did the Slido earlier on. And actually, I thought what was really interesting is that we had, you know, this quite a large majority that were really interested in, and I'm trying to get the right wording here, the general trends of soil health in time and space, but at the local scale. So that's what the majority of people in the room actually said they were interested in. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for, I was just moved by one of the questions. Well, the whole panel was fantastic, of course, but I wanted to emphasize something. When you ask regarding how we reach the families, perhaps we can give also the room, the voice now for at least one of the farmers that is still present in the room to explain what he or she thinks about it. Would it be possible to see the perspective of the farmers? So we complement the beautiful panel here. Like just 2 minutes, if there is a farmer still.
Yeah. We'll get you a microphone. Give me 1 second. Yeah.
Wait a minute. I need a small translation of.
In the white. Yeah, in the white carbon.
When I put on foot.
Come to the front. Come to the front.
Yeah. Close to the farmer. It was nice to hear another farmer here. I am a farmer from Galicia, and my point of view of all this relation between the soil and families and soil health, I think the farmers are the connection, the straight connection to make circular economy, to close all circles of the organic matter, for example. And the organic matter, yesterday I said that with the food we have a straight link between the soil and citizens to engage them, but in the back, the food waste, the rest of the food, bio-waste, the connection is with the soil, always is a farmer. Mm-hmm. To create the food, you need a farmer. To recuperate the cycle or close the cycle, you need a farmer. Mm-hmm. And then I think the position of farmers should be taken care a lot, because it's a very important role, in my opinion.
So maybe, can I ask you a question there? I mean, we have the living labs that are being rolled out. And so as farmers, you and Anne-Catherine, maybe we can bring a microphone back to Anne-Catherine as well. Does the idea of the living labs, so working together, co-creating, developing ideas, how does that work for you? Do you think this is a step forward? Because we've been talking for many, many years about monitoring, but now we're talking about co-creating and working together in partnership. How does that work?
Yeah. I don't think it works. Oh no, it's okay. Yes, it's a good step because, you know, as I said, we have our practices for grandparents. I think for 100 years, 1,000 years, we use these practices. And so now we are creating new practices. So I can be confident with that because we know that there is problem of weeds with this kind of agriculture. Now there is expert for weeds in this kind of system. So the only way to go in this practice to improve the soil health is to make good examples. And I'm trying things. Something is good, something it doesn't look really good. And my neighbors said, "Oh, new practices, yes, but finally, or my practices are better." Mm-hmm. When finally I will arrive to, after 7-8 years of general practices, to good results, they will say, okay, maybe there is something to do. And so this kind of example can help to create good example, good videos, to promote things, to explain things, and to develop things.
Thank you. And Victor?
I totally agree, but I can add, I think that people, normally, we are all human beings, we need lines to follow. And the lighthouses and living labs makes the opportunity to visibilize these lines, no?
Yeah.
And then we need pioneers,
yeah.
like she did. See, I have the same problems. My neighbors thinks I am economist, I'm neo-rural. 15 years ago in the farm with my wife that is from Madrid, we are in Galicia. And say, oh, they are crazy, they have money, they will spend the money, in 5 years or less, they are again in the city. But 15 years later, we are a lighthouse for them.
Great.
Lot of practices when a year has a lot of less rain, is quite dry, and our corn is in good condition, our wheat is in good condition. Of people.
Then they're willing to listen and to talk.
And the lighthouses has this view.
Yeah.
I don't know how we'll be focused because lighthouses and living lab are a really new approach.
Yeah.
And depending on how you can manage to address properly the focus of real lighthouses and living labs, the best result to communicate and to engage to other farmers to follow the lines.
Thank you very much, Victor. Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
And I think a key element actually of the lighthouses and living labs is not just about demonstration, but it's also about listening. Listening from the scientific community, from the policy community, from many other actors to what the local practical needs are and how to help with that. Let's move to Finland. Yep.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm Liisa Pietola, soil scientist and farmer in Finland and also the board member of Soil Mission. So I go back to the soil indicators and harmonization of soil indicators. So I would like to ask how much you consider the different soil types and the need for different measurements to have a certain soil indicator, like phosphorus index. This morning, Professor Greve showed us the Ulsten P, but it does not fit for our conditions of acidic clay soils in Finland. So for farmers also, we need kind of these indicators we are used to use. In Finland, we have 70 years history for soil testing, and I would love to keep these indicators and extraction methods we are used to. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think this is something that we commonly hear about. So it's alignment to practices that have been implemented for many years in countries, not just in the measurement and the protocols, but also in the sampling. We've had many discussions on that as well. Arwin, maybe can I put this to you?
Yep. Indeed, we're aware that there are long-term monitoring programs in many European countries, and the thinking behind the soil monitoring law is that indeed these should continue. So we're not looking to try to replace them. And the approach is for us to try and look to develop some sort of relationship between what is being measured by certain practice in a certain country to, say, a European perspective, something like LUCAS, so that the data that's been collected at a national level using this procedure can be transferred somehow to, let's say, a standard. So we have a harmonized value. And for countries that maybe do not have an operational soil monitoring system, then perhaps LUCAS can act as a sort of a cover for them until they have their national system up and running again. And then I think it's important to stress what you say, that different soil characteristics will have an important influence on the data.
Thank you very much, Arwin. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Yes, on the front row here. And Katerina, I'll come to you in a minute. Yep. Can we?
No, it's not. In fact, it's not a question, but it's just to react to what Anne-Catherine has said as a farmer perspective. I'm from DG AGRI, but I'm more involved in a CEP implementation, and I understand the concern for farmers when they have to implement some requirements, some intervention, and it's a very sensitive issue. And we are aware about your difficulty due to the climate change anyway. As you point out on the soil cover and green cover, anyway, we will have expert group next week to talk about that. not to address your concern maybe, but just to underline, in European Commission, we try to set some requirement, but we have in dialogue with member states, and member states have to be in touch with a stakeholder to design in a convenient way the intervention. And for us, the main point, when you design something, the requirement should make sense, should achieve something. It's not to only to stick on the and to
tick a box.
Money, but after we waste time because we have to control, it takes energy to apply, to control, to send people on the spot. I think it's useless for us just to achieve something. And after, when we talk about catch crop, in fact, at EU level, we don't want to design a specific date or specific, we want to ensure there is a mandatory duration, but we don't want to design the starting point and the final date.
Yeah.
We assume we should design that at local level.
Absolutely. And I think actually this is where something like the Living Lab concept can be really useful, because we see with many practices, some practices work in certain conditions, but they can be really detrimental in other conditions. So we have to learn that diversity of needs of practices across Europe and what works where. And I think the Living Lab approach will very much help with that in terms of testing, well, can it work, doesn't it work? It's a disaster, thank goodness we don't have a policy that says I have to do it. So that gives us some flexibility.
Can I react?
Yes, of course you can.
Quickly. So thank you very much for this consideration for our problems and this awareness of this, because we all want good agriculture, science, and reaching highest objective. What they say at the regional level, it's yes, we need means to control. So we need data. And we know that in a land of Germany, they do in another way. So we are searching information about that. In France, they have the label highest value practices, and so it's more with an advisor, and if you are in a good way, they say it's okay and it's not date. So it's way we would like to go to, because climate, soil, all is living. So with living, it's difficult to put dates. And really, I think that in this goal of soil health, we must be progressive. Firstly, everyone with good organic matter, then less tillage. Maybe sometimes tillage is still needed with this climate change when you don't have the soil structure. So stay progressive, and finally we will see the results. So yes, we must find the means to be in this direction. But thank you very much, because on the field, sometimes it's really complicated, really stressful also, because I'm going to have problems because the date is not okay, but I cannot do because there is rains and so on.
I think the changing climatic conditions is having a huge impact across the whole of Europe, never mind the globe. So yeah, these are constraints that, of course, when the dates were set, we didn't think of these things so much. Okay, moving on to Katharina.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to come back to the issue of scaling. And thanks to you, we discussed the spatial scaling a lot. We did not yet touch upon the temporal scaling part. And we know, of course, that some processes of soil deterioration are very sudden, such as soil erosion, such as contamination. Others are really slow. And in particular, the soil remediation, the improvement of soil health is very, very slow. And when we do the monitoring, it's very important, but we always are behind the activity, because what we measure today is the result of what happened like 20 years ago or 10 years ago or something. So don't we need to also address some kind of a forward-looking monitoring in terms of modeling or something, which would also help the farmers to, or the policymakers also, to better trust the farmers in finding the right measures at the right place, because they then could look into the impacts, into the results, forward-looking of the activities they do.
Richard, are you coming in there? Yeah.
David's given me the microphone. Thank you very much for that question. And I don't know if you remember, day one, I said the new process models. They are absolutely essential that we start to look forward, just not, you know, oh, that's happened and now that's happened. We really need to understand which practices and also risk zones. But I really want to emphasize, I've been pushed time and time again, farmland's where the problems are, we know that. So let's forget about the forest and we'll just do where the risk zone, we'll do a risk-based approach to doing things. The problem is that suggests perfect knowledge. And we would never have found the ozone hole if we'd just done this approach. We absolutely have to keep monitoring in a structured, repeatable way. I think the Soil Monitoring Directive is absolutely right. A 5-year monitoring rolling program is what we can do, but then we need some proactive erosion can happen overnight, right? So if we can have models that say, here's our risk zones, which Panos absolutely does it, we're getting these really big events, we've got no soil cover over, soil cover over there, we need to then zoom in on that. But we mustn't just do this adaptive risk-based approach because it suggests we absolutely know, and we are going into an absolute uncharted territory with new technologies, climate change, and we must keep this structured approach with the models and the risk-based on top, is what I say. So thank you for the question, and models, absolutely, we need those going forward so that we can advise the farmers where they need to focus on and what measures to do where. Thank you.
And Katerina, I just want to come in there from the local scale as well, because I think we do have a difference in scale here. So yes, we can look at the big projections and what are the threats that potentially are happening, but we also need to think about how can we work with landowners to also see the transition themselves. So we want to measure these things, and I think carbon comes back again and again where we see this desperate need to quantify it every year, but we know it doesn't change in such short timelines. And yet we want to associate that. So we also need to think at the local level, what are the things that farmers themselves can look at to see, is the transition going in the right direction? Am I seeing positive effects? How can we provide them with the skills and the knowledge to do that at the local level? That's not easy. There's many people trying to do it. But so there's different ways of actually thinking about filling that gap between the final outcome and implementing the intervention, for example. Teresa.
Just to add on that, I think one thing which needs to be identified at the local level is what type of other indicator, something else which you can show to the farmer that change is occurring. Maybe there will be something on the productivity or something else on the water retention, which is already showing signs of improvement very soon. So that will be a motivation for them to continue. So maybe you cannot measure some of the dimensions of the soil, will not change very fast, but some other characteristics will change, which will help them understand that this is the right way.
Thank you very much. We have time for one question, I think at the back of the room there.
Yeah, well, I'm Lars Munkholm from Aarhus University. It's actually more like a comment, because we are always talking about the farmer as the central end user of this, and we see the farmer as the landowner, the land manager, and also the operator. But that's really not the case across Europe, because in many cases the land is owned by somebody, the farmer is the manager, and the operator is a contractor. So if you want to have a change, we need to be in contact with all those
other actors in the system.
All the actors.
Yeah.
It's not just looking at farmer as the one who is owning, operating, managing the land. It's much more complex.
I totally agree. Now we have a decision to make, because I see people saying, well, I also have a comment here, but it's also lunchtime. So we're a few minutes, yeah? Okay, well, we had a question here first, and then I'll come to you, I promise. The microphone.
Thank you very much. My name is Paloma Melgarejo. I am Professor of Research of INIA-CSIC, but also a member of the Soil Mission Board. I would like to highlight that farmers need to have tools to measure indicators. I am very happy to know that in Belgium, farmers have problems to get laboratories to analyze soils. In Spain, it's the same. And the interpretation of results is quite difficult for them. And I would like to say to policymakers that is an important issue to treat, not only at national level, but also at regional. They need to have laboratories to send the samples and also to interpret the results to improve their soil health.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
Yes.
So thank you very much. Karine Petit, National Contact Point for Wallonia. Yeah. And I would like just to, hello Anne-Catherine, thank you very much for your brilliant testimony. And I would like to react also on the last, the comment just before. I think that we have still to complete the knowledge chain that we implement here, and with the living labs and the lighthouses, we go to the farmers, to the farms and so on, and that's very brilliant. But we still need to be on the stage here, the agricultural advisors. Yeah. They are missing, and they do the job to go to the farmer and to provide them with the knowledge.
Yes.
So this is absolutely essential. I made already the point 2-3 years ago when I was in the program committee, because I was delegate in program committee of Cluster 6 and the mission. I think this is essential to work with them.
And what I must say is there is a project within the Mission Soil called MB Soil, which is very much working with training of agricultural advisors to ensure actually also more up-to-date knowledge and implementation of knowledge. I don't know if he's here, but I do know that project was represented. Alberto.
Yeah, I have a question to the panel. I mean, soil protection is not a European issue, it's a global issue. So you see there is space to discussion among continents to tackle this and develop a system of global monitoring of soil.
Would anyone like to answer? Louis? Yeah. You've taken us up a whole new level, a whole new scale. Yeah. Louis.
Well, I take the opportunity also to answer, to complement what was said on advisors, because for us, for example, the lighthouses should be connected to the advisory networks as well. So MB Soil the title of the project is the next generation of soil advisors. So this is important because also the advisory has been many times attached to the service providers or input providers. So we need really new independent advisors, and the project and the lighthouses should also serve for that. Yeah. And on the global soil footprint, this is one of the objectives of the mission as well, and that is in our agenda. We are planning more actions in the international dimension, and of course we are well aware. And I think was said yesterday many times, but I think someone touch upon that well, if we solve the problem here and export the problem somewhere else, we are not solving the problem. It's a global problem. So yeah, the mission has this objective, and you will see soon actions on that regard.
Very nice, thank you. Yeah. Okay. Yep, Owen. Yeah. And then I think, do we have to close? Oh, 10 minutes left. Oh, get thinking of your questions. Go on, Owen.
10 minutes.
Not for you.
No, I think it's a good point that Alberto made, and actually we should look at the UN conventions, global conventions, and actually soil is increasingly recognised at that level as well. The EU will declare itself as affected by desertification under the UNCCD, and there are reporting obligations and elements in there. In the conference on biodiversity in Canada earlier this year, there was a recommendation for a global soil biodiversity observatory, and then under all the climate issues, carbon is there, fundamental. Yeah. So indeed, the global, say, picture is coming together, basically.
Yeah.
Just to stress that.
And I think at national level, many of us could think about what externalities we're pushing.
Yeah, I think obviously from a New Zealand perspective, I really agree with a global observatory or a global association, whatever you want to call it, strategy. And I think, so there's talk about a level playing field for Europe, for instance, in terms of soil monitoring, but obviously that goes globally as well. So I'm here to learn from Europe. But in New Zealand and I suppose in other countries, yeah, there is this sentiment of, well, why would we do anything for climate or the environment if the rest of the world isn't joining? And so, yeah, I think it's increasingly important that we have those global agreements on treating soil as a valuable resource.
Thank you. And yeah, I'll come to you in 1 second, but one question that I have for the panel, and feel free who wants to answer it, but we see, and I put in my presentation as well, that there is this increasing interest from the business sectors, from the value chains, and they want to be part of sustainable soil systems, and many can call it greenwashing. Others feel that there is a real ambition there to actually support this and put it within the value chain systems. What's our perspective on this? Do we work with companies? Do we fear companies? How do we feel about it? Maybe it's a very tricky question to ask, but I think we should.
Yeah, if I may, because yesterday exactly we have a breakout session on business models.
Yeah.
So this topic, this issue came up during the conversation. I would like to come back again to the point of monitoring. So if we have strong systems and harmonized systems to monitor and to measure beyond what can be claimed by a specific company, we will be really giving good information to the consumers, also to the investors, because they want to know, understand exactly what this business is about. So if there are clear indicators, simple ones that they can monitor, this will also attract investment. And finally, also to say that I think all the actors have to be involved, all the stakeholders, also investors. It's the shift, the change we have to make is huge. I don't think it can be only done with public money, and we really need also to involve the other stakeholders, players in the whole value chain. So yes, I think there is a role for them, and of course, I think we have the tools to fight against greenwashing or things like that.
Great, I like to hear that.
Bridget?
Yeah, Bridget?
Yeah, I totally agree with Lewis. Green finance money is going to make public funding look tiny in comparison. Yeah. The key thing is to pick your companies really well, those who are in it for the long term. I'm sure many of you have seen the John Oliver podcast about carbon offsetting, where he set up a carbon offsetting accreditation overnight. I mean, there is a huge problem with a lot of this stuff. Carbon worries me to death. And most of the green finance companies we're talking to have already moved on beyond carbon. Yeah. They are wanting a systems approach. They know nutrient neutrality is coming, biodiversity is coming, and therefore they really want to do it. But you've just got to choose which companies you get into bed with very carefully. But they are already buying out farms and planting horrendous monoculture conifer trees over parts of my country. And so we just need to work with them to try and avoid that and instead get a more systems-based ecosystems approach. Thanks.
Diego, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks. Yes, I think this issue is also related with the farmers. How can we know what companies or investors want? Well, we need to ask them. Yeah. We need to try to speak their language. And that's what she's been saying. We need like a set of indicators that are easy to explain to the investors. I'm in soil physics. I'm interested in multifractal spectrum of soil, but I cannot go to a farmer and explain these things. I need something simple. Yeah. And related to that, I mean, with the previous issue with the farmers, I think also it is important to try to solve something. If something works, the farmer is not very interested. I'm from the research, but my family, they have farms. So if I go and try to change something that has been working for 70, 80 years, it is impossible. We have this opportunity now with the climate change, because I feel like every time we have more extreme weather conditions, more diseases, and this we are feeling this in the area where I live. So I think this is an opportunity to offer solutions, offer security to the farmers.
Yeah. Yeah, and that has the knock-on effect then with the value chains as well at the higher scale. We had a question at the back. I do just want to come back to... Oh, sorry.
On the companies, because I will be maybe the person who will deal with a company for my soil. Why not? Why not? In most of case, we say, okay, we are going to put a label, you will pay more, and we will reward our what you do. And finally, at the end, it is, if you want to sell in this chain value, you must have this label and you have the same price than the others. So at the end, we have lost. So how we can do? I think we can act with some contracts between the companies, the farmers. The contracts must be re-established each year and taking into account the change of the cost of production. And maybe we will need support of administrative policies to support us to say, no, you can go below this value, this payment for 1 liter of milk of wheat. If not, you are not respecting the farmer, you are not giving the fair price. In this way, I think it can go, yes.
I actually heard recently from a colleague of mine who does monitoring, reporting and verification, works with value chains, that one particular product that she's working with, the company has 200 criteria that a farmer has to match in order to get the accreditation, or the label. 200 criteria within a season. I mean, I found that astonishing. I was really quite shocked to find that out. But it exists, and I'm sure it exists more. To the back.
Yeah, I think that was a perfect assist because I'm not a soil scientist. I actually work in impact finance, and I raised my hand before your question. So first a comment that I think the question for you all, very expert, is like, why are you doing it for? And really, what's the point of measuring this, if not to engage also with these other actors that might be convinced to come in because you can show that, you know, what's good or not. So I think that has to be at the core, and that stakeholder engagement element that you talked, it cannot be picking stakeholders, the one that you like or not. I think around the farm, a lot is happening. So that's a point of reflection as a comment. And then the thing I wanted to ask is, I heard about this selecting the right indicators and showing what's good and what's good to advise. I was wondering if there is any sense, given your experience, in how can we also not only show improvement, but also show that something is already good, because maybe a farmer has been doing that for ages. And how can we still show that that's good, even though there is not that additionality element, and so that perhaps incentives cannot kind of punish the early adopters, the pioneer that have been doing good stuff for long, in terms of really how we measure that. And so that was the question.
Yeah.
Sorry again, but just to say that benchmark approach, do you remember that population like here? That is exactly so that people can say, I'm already in the green zone. I'm in the top 10%. Reward me, or green finance companies support me because I'm in the top 10%, or I'm in the orange middle zone, or I'm in the bottom 10%, and that's a bit embarrassing and I want to move up. So those populations, we're not trying to say this is the right number, and it absolutely, those benchmarks are for my soil type, for my land use type, for my climate zone. So before anyone says it's all very variable, you absolutely put that into where you create it. And that means you can show, I've been doing this great stuff for 40 years. My grandfather and grandmother did it. Reward me now, and you can go to a company and say, I'm one of the good guys, come and support me, or I want to move up. So, yeah.
Of having a healthy soil system.
Yeah. Does that, sorry, I wasn't clear.
Yeah, over here.
So I just wanted to go back to the global observatory. I'm Jacob Parnell with Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and my task right now is to put forward recommendations to countries on how to implement a national, so a globalized globally harmonized national system, so that each country would be able to adopt this recommendation. So I love, and I'm hoping that I can, because I see Lucas and Soil Bond and a lot of these initiatives as pioneers in this area, and I don't want to do something different. And so I'm hoping that I can, and I've been in discussions with several of you, and I'd like to continue with those discussions on how to build this recommendation for a global soil biodiversity observatory.
Thank you, Jakob. Any comments? No? Okay. Well, I think it's lunchtime, so we'll... Oh, sorry. Oh, I think I can see people desperately wanting to have their lunch, so I'm afraid, Erwin, I'm going to wrap up. Just to say a huge thank you for the discussion and the debate that went on. I think it's really important. I think it's also really nice that we recognise these differences in spatial scales and that there are different needs and different support that the different actors at the scales need. I look forward to having more conversations about these different scales and how we deal with them and what needs to be at European. How do we help the value chains? Where do we go global and help Jakob? And where do we go local and help Victor and Katerina and the many farmers, foresters, urban systems that also are wanting that support and advice? So thank you. Thank you also from David and the panel here. Maybe we can just have a picture with the panel, or have we already done it? With the diagram in the background. Yeah. Oh, no. Okay, it's going back. Sorry, we're just going to, if we can get you to just sit, we'll just take one picture. Louis? Sorry, we're just going to do one photo with the panel. I think...